Welcome everyone to On Patrol podcast. I'm Wyndhurst Production, joined with,
Fightin Kentuckian.
and this is episode 21 and our first episode of 2025. And I think we couldn't have started with a better topic for this episode. We would be talking, interviewing a legend in the hobby. But that has to come after our normal alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. Which, Kentuckian, do you have anything for us on your end?
Just the year in review. I know that we talked a little bit about. It was a great episode. I really enjoyed people posting about their models and what they did and those things. That was pretty awesome to see. I'm super excited for just when people talk about progress and when they share their things on the On Patrol Facebook group. I think it's that gets me fired up. It gets me, ready to kind of be like, okay, I can attack this. And so share your stuff on there, share your painting styles, your rule books, your rule sets, what you're doing. It helps kind of me to just get inspiration and look back at what other people are doing. Nothing major. I think that we talked a lot about kind of where we've been and where we're wanting to go. And as we're already, we're filming or recording this late January. We're 30 days in from that, and I'm like, oh my God, I've barely done anything. So that's always a good kind of punch in the gut about, we come out with delusions of grandeur. People have seen some of the ancient stuff I've been posting and some of the games that's been going on, but it's good to be healthy and realistic. Just like we talked about goals in the hobby, it always goes back to those SMART goals and like how to kind of tackle the 30 minutes a night and those stuff. I've talked to a few people on there about, man, I can't knock out that much, or I can't do that. And I had a buddy come up here recently in between the holidays or after the holidays, Andreas, and he is a prolific painter and terrain maker. And he was just like, man, I've talked to you about this, and I think if you can really do that 30 minutes a night, every other night, like just paint brown on belts tonight. It's not whiz pow stuff. And then next thing you know, by the time you turn around, you got it done. So I'm trying to remind myself as we go into January, and all the miniature projects I have and terrain projects that I have, which is very fortuitous that we're about to talk to a heavyweight here. But that's all I really have as far as alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. Show us what you're doing and keep updating us, and we'll help keep you accountable, and you help keep us accountable. What about you, Wyndhurst?
Yeah, so the year in review, I shared as well on Facebook. My list I update throughout the year. So it's January, it's 1 month in, so everyone should be able to know right now how many games you have played this month, how many models you have painted. So I really, really encourage everybody to track that, and I challenge you all that December of 25 to share it with us on the community, on the group, and so we can all look back and see how much we've added to this hobby, how many models we've got done, how many games people have played. I think that would be a real good show of just how alive and vibrant this community is. So you have no excuse. I'm reminding you right now, it's January. It should all be fresh in your mind, so I don't want to hear, well, I can't remember, unless you've just painted that much already, in which case you probably have a problem. I know, like Kentuckian said, I'm struggling on getting as much done as I thought I would be doing. I think my problem is with this project that is really taking off for the Air Force. I'm spending a lot of time kind of hobby related, even at work and after work, that when I get home, I'm kind of already burnt out a little bit. And that happens with all of us. And sometimes you need other things to kind of veg out on, so you don't get burnt out on your hobby stuff. But that's all I have. And so without further ado, Kentuckian will take us off for this episode.
Steve, we truly appreciate you being here and taking the time to talk with us today. You have a rich history in the war games hobby, and you're at the forefront of providing some of the most premier and affordable gaming terrain on the market. The company Sarissa Precision Limited started in, Steve, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but from the internet searches I've seen, it's 2010.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Has over a decade of experience in providing customers with fantastic terrain to fight over in the most famous historical, exceptional, futuristic, or even creative battles and skirmishes. Most importantly, and always for me and Rob here, is they are super inexpensive. I don't want to say cheap, because cheap denotes like it's not high quality. I think it's exceptionally high quality, but inexpensive. However, who are the masters behind this terrain, right? Behind this company, and who's responsible for all this outstanding terrain? And I know, Steve, you're going to say you have a team, but we have the privilege of having you here today, the great Steve Cumming of the great and powerful Sarissa Precision Limited. So let's gather around the fire pit or huddle in the foxhole and get to know one of the leaders of the terrain in the hobby, Steve Cumming. So, Steve, truly appreciate you being here. Can't say enough about you.
No, it's exciting to be here and talk about toys.
Yeah. So I'll kick it over to Rob so we'll get into the getting to know Steve Cumming questions.
Yep. So, like Kentuckian said, we're going to start first, Steve, talking about you and your experience in the hobby. You've heard our episodes before with interviews, and then we'll get into the kind of deep dive behind Sarissa itself. So, the first thing we like to ask all our guests is, what got you started in this hobby?
I remember it, I received a 1/72nd scale box of Napoleonic Prussians as a birthday present randomly as a young boy, and I didn't have a clue what they were. What were Prussians, Yeah, and it sort of that started me down that route, looking for more boxes of toy soldiers.
You put a year on
and
that?
That was really it. Yeah. Used to line them all up on tables and set everything up and spend hours doing that.
Airfix and all of those things are like huge in everybody's kind of hobby. I can hear an accent, all right, and just Steve, as you can hear my hillbilly English, right? This is what old English sounds like in the deep dark hills of Appalachia. Where are you originally from? And those things, just to kind of let the listeners know that as well.
I was born in Perth, in Scotland, in central Scotland on the east coast. And then I came down to just outside Nottingham with work. And I've been down here longer than I lived in Scotland. So I've been down here since 1992. Yeah.
Speaking of about that time frame, how upset or happy are you with the depiction of William Wallace in Braveheart?
No comment.
Well, the follow-up to get us kind of back to letting the listeners and stuff understand and about you. So a lot of people, as young boys, young children, get into the hobby, just like you said. Plastic and Airfix are normally like the segue from 54 millimeter. Like my dad used to play with Marks, was a company that made the 54 millimeter, like what we think of as green and tan Army men. But what was the game, that first brought you into the hobby when you're talking about rules and kind of learning it and growing that mechanic? And even, if it's just making up the rules like most of us did in the, we're going to shoot rubber bands at them, or we're going to roll a dice and on a 4, the guy dies or whatever. What was that?
Strangely, I'd sort of dabbled. I'd done some D&D at school with some friends, dabbled a bit in first edition Warhammer Fantasy when it first came out. We'd sort of cut out squares of card, tacked as units, and play on the floor. It wasn't actually until I moved down here. I'd collected and painted models, and I had lots of Games Workshop stuff, etc. And then when I came down here, I just started going out and doing things, as a new boy. Went to the local Games Workshop in Derby and started playing. So it was 40k was probably the first rule set. Yeah.
I'll kick it back over to Rob.
Was there an individual who was influential in your early hobby experience that kind of brought you, or
friend, parent?
No, they all think I'm mad. Yeah, they all think, some of them just don't get it. Even now, after all this time, it's starting to sort of click that it is actually quite funny.
It's not going away.
No. Yeah. So that, and then I found out that I actually only lived about after a few years of that, I then went over to Warhammer World, and it just been done up the first time, and started gaming there. And I ended up actually being helping to run the club, the games club, on a Thursday night there.
Wow.
Which at its height would have about 120 people gaming every week.
Wow.
All sorts of things. You were actually allowed to play anything at that time in the hall. So you'd people playing Flames of War, Warhammer Ancient Battles, but all sorts, little card games, all sorts. It was a really good club there.
Is this around the 90s, early 90s?
Yeah,
late
this
90s?
is kind of late 90s now. Yeah, but
GW at that time, I think going into the early 2000s is when they had the historical, like Games Workshop historical, right? And so, man, the Warhammer Ancient Battlefields are just so cool, and they had so many cool games, the pirate stuff, Napoleonics, everying. So
West.
Yeah, that's the specialist games, and those games I played a lot of. I actually, me and a couple of friends, we actually got commissioned to do a Napoleonic version of War Master for them, and we signed it all off. It was finished. It was just ready to get laid out, and they pulled the plug on
the
historical.
Yeah.
So I didn't go back there for a while because that hot.
My only comment on that is where Warhammer Ancient Battles was so similar to like Old World and those things. I really think that was a good like breeding ground to get people into both communities together. And I understand GW, it's a financial decision not to, if you're not making the minis for it or you're not doing that and you're only doing the IP really with the rule sets, maybe you need to cut sling load. But it just seemed like a really good time there, and GW was helping to kind of build the bridge between both communities.
Yeah.
But woe is me. Let's see what GW does in the future.
You can't, you look at the decisions they've made, and you can't say that they haven't worked out for them as a business.
Oh, exactly.
So
exactly. Well, and that's like anything, like the niche stuff that wargamers always talk about. I know with Yorkshire, it's Italian Wars or something like that. I'm sure you get ludicrous comments, and we'll save that for when we get talking about Sarissa a little bit more. But hey, I need you to build this building from this little known battle. Are you guys going to make it? And you're like, financially, that's probably not a good decision. But to stick back on rule sets and to your kind of personal journey with the hobby, it's like picking kids, Steve. And if you've heard these interviews before, what's your favorite wargaming rule set? And you can have honorable mentions. I'll already let you hedge. But what's your favorite? Getting to know more about you. What's your favorite wargaming rule set?
I really like Epic Armageddon. Yeah, in its older form. Yeah, I think it's just objectives. It doesn't matter what dies. It doesn't matter about this. It's just complete those objectives. And I just quite like the simplicity of that. Yeah.
What would be some honorable mentions for you? What are other game systems?
Footsole's Gangs of Rome 2, the second version. I love that. I love the mechanics, the action stack and things like that. That's a really, really cool game. But they do a couple of good games.
They do, yeah.
And that's sort of, I think now I quite like those small miniature count games. Where we are and the people I know, we're quite lucky. So I kind of play a lot of games when they're getting play tested. So I've played some Gangs of Rome. I've played Barnes War. I've played 200 Hours that Grafe and now have got out and things like that. So I sort of play. I'll give anything a go. Which means I kind of bounce around all over the place and don't play anything all the time.
Well, that's good. It's always fresh. The only thing that when I think of a skirmish game, I'm like, it's easy to get into because it's a little bit of, a handful of miniatures, handful of terrain and everything. But I would have to say, me and Rob are big muskets and tomahawks war gamers. We like some skirmish games that we play. Gangs of Rome, more than I would say any other skirmish games, has some of the most impressive tables with your terrain. And I know, again, we're not to Sarissa yet. I keep trying to jump the gun here, but the city streets and all the things that you guys have done with the buildings, it's anybody go look at those pictures online. If you've never even heard of Gangs of Rome or you're looking at it and you're like, I don't want it to be daunting for people, because it's not, because the buildings are pretty easy to put together and everything. But those are some impressive. You're just like, wow, more so than what you see in like 1920s skirmish games, like some of the Mafia games and some of those. Those are impressive with brick buildings and brownstones. But man, that terrain has really brought those games to life. I'll kick it back to Rob for us to keep driving on.
Yeah. So, do you have a favorite historical period? Either one that you might not game it a lot, but it might be your favorite. You wish you could game it more, collect more in it.
100% Napoleonics.
Really?
I just love the color and the pomp of it all. Yeah.
What's just a follow up for that? What scale is your favorite with Napoleonics?
I've got a really, really big 10 mil Napoleonic army. Yeah, and I've had it for years now. And I love the look of that. I've kind of played some 28 mil, like Black Powder, but I just love the look of the grand battles and that scale. So Warlord bringing out their epic scale stuff. And that's kind of more what it looks like it should.
Yeah, I'm finding it's really a good scale for those kind of wars.
I think when you think about it, when I first was looking around, most of it was 15 mil. 28 Warlord didn't exist at the start, and then they came along and things like that. So there was some, but there wasn't a lot. So I was probably more used to smaller scale 10, 15 mil stuff, and then it's kind of come full circle now, and you're starting to see that size change and the game scale change.
I feel like 28, although it looks beautiful, if you're playing it with brigades and you're going up to, like in Napoleonics, you've got huge corps fighting, it just looks like a rugby scrum on the table, and it's just push and whoever's going to roll the dice. But with the epics, what I'm noticing, and I grew up on Napoleon's battles, is you see a little bit more of the tactics, the attack columns and stuff, and I like the feel of that. I feel it's more how the period kind of can show itself. That's awesome. What for 10 millimeter, and trying to now put your timeline in order, what's the manufacturer of those?
And they are. A lot of them are the Flashing Blade. Flashing Blade, which I think he might have sold them to someone else now. It's that long ago. Sure, it's Flashing Blade.
Okay.
The beautiful sculpts, little 10 mil sculpts.
And you can, whoever says you can't get detail in sculpts, like I understand some people are not overly excited about Warlord's plastics with the epics because it is such an assembly line with the 10-man rank. But Callistra, does an amazing job. Even Bacchus at 6 millimeter does, you can still see some pretty dynamic poses there. The next follow-up question to kind of this on what's your favorite period and stuff is, we all go through different changes in the hobby, whether we're researching something, painting, or playing a lot more, right? We just go through different stages in life as well. And sometimes it's, you've painted this model or you've bought this model or it's significant to you because it helped you hold the line at this famous, war game you played. But what is your favorite model or unit in your collection that you have? And not, it doesn't have to be because it's painted to a 10. Maybe it was the first model you did, or it's just, you just love the look of it. You love the dynamic of it. I've
still got it. It's still in cases now and again I get it out. I've got a Tau army when they were rubbish and no one ever wanted, but I love them. I think they're great. They're all done in a desert thing. What was the big campaign book that Forge World did?
I don't know much of I could never afford the Forge World stuff. Their stuff was too expensive.
So, but they were done in a desert scheme. It was mechanized. They were all in Devilfish when that was just a really stupid idea. But I just loved the look of it. And
I think the tower. I do a bit more fantasy and sci-fi stuff than Kentuckian does, but I feel like the tower underrated. They have a really nice aesthetic. I mean, I've got a group of them that I've painted up, and I'd just like to use them as my generic aliens for different sci-fi games because they have just such a nice look to them. But I think they're in the realm of fantasy and sci-fi models. They are very underrated because they get such a bad rap from people who play 40K that I think people don't appreciate how nice the models look.
Yeah, they got awesome tanks, you know.
Yeah. Back to you, Rob.
Do you have a favorite game, like your best game? So, like, as an example, for me, I had a game with the club when I was stationed here the first time that we did a an American Revolution on the 4th of July. And, you know, they hosted it and we barbecued out and everything. It was just a great whole experience. But just that one best game that stands out in your memory. It's like the best time you had.
So there's a colleague of mine, Dave, who likes to analyze every aspect of a rule set and an army list and try and optimize it. And quite a lot of times we'll have on a Monday night, we'll have a gaming session and we'll just stick some stuff on the table and play with what we've got, and it infuriates him. So we were playing Blood Red Skies, and he had this big rant about why would anybody take hurricanes? They're not very good when you could have this, you could have that. So he picked his list, and one of the guys played some hurricanes against him and shot all of his planes down. And then he said that was just luck, so then I did it to him. So the two games were quite memorable from that, because he then, every time he mentions anything, we just say to him, average hurricanes.
It's the ultimate, like, hey, sorry, your sound judgment's a no-go at that point. No, those are exactly what we're looking for. You know, some games are just memorable, like the Texans winning the Alamo or whatnot, or just like, well, it just happened, their dice got hot or whatnot. But and the fact that it happened twice, that's pretty funny. That's going to live with him for a while. We talked a little bit about kind of your early ascension into the hobby and getting the hang of it there in the 90s, and then moving on and getting into GW. And so we hear it all the time about people transitioning into new games, periods, or groups. When and what, if you did transition in the hobby, like when did that happen? And maybe it's happened a few times. What would you highlight for us as some of the transitions? Like, obviously getting the GW at the ground floor, and then when did you probably start going over to historicals, and then what other kind of overall 30,000 foot view on these things? Where have you bounced around and transitioned from?
I think I've still bounced around. I haven't really nailed my colours to any mast. If I like the look of something, or somebody just says, do you fancy playing this? I'll just have a go at anything. There's some real gems out there, little gems that you just don't see. There's some great little independent guys that have made a rule set on their own in a little range of figures. Flags of War with these border wars. And he's got some great little ranges there.
That his miniatures are amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't know a lot about that period. I assume that's around where you're from originally, correct? Right?
No, I'm sort of the central Scotland, so a bit further up. But that's all around the border, so southern Scotland and northern England. Yeah.
Yeah.
A period of a couple of 100 years of people stealing each other's cows.
Well, it's always fun to paint. The Tartan and some of the stuff that he's got going on, and he's got some great miniatures for that range. What was his name, Steve? I can't remember that guy that does Flags of War.
Ian McDonald.
Ian McDonald. Yep.
Yeah.
He does amazing stuff. If you're listening to this now, go look on his website, and I believe he has some of the painted models up there on display. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful. Besides the flags, the minis that he's done for that are absolutely beautiful. Yeah. Kicking it back to you, Wyndhurst.
They are some models. It's one of those cases for me when you see his miniatures. It's like, I don't war game that period. I don't have anything for that period. I don't even have rules, but I'm sorely tempted to buy them just because they're such nice sculpts. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you had gotten commissioned by GW to write with some other lads some Napoleon rules. Was that your entry into the industry side of the hobby? And if it was, what led to then Sarissa?
It wasn't. It was just we played a lot of games because we were playing games at Warhammer World. we played a lot of War Master Ancients and got to know Rick Priestley through that, from some of the historical weekends at Games Workshop. And we just thought the rules would work well, change over well. So we gave him a demo game of it. He thought they were good, and then that ended up being a commission to do some. Yeah. As to Sarissa, that's a bit different. We were playing Legends of the Old West. So you mentioned, yeah. I mean, we didn't have any buildings, and a friend of mine had access to a laser cutter. So we knocked some files up and cut some buildings. Another friend actually had an online retail business and said, I could sell those. And that's really, it wasn't no big plan. We just made some stuff that people liked and sold some of it.
That sounds like a trend in a couple of our interviews.
Yeah. What is, I do have this. It's always interesting. So I'm a huge Ancients fan, and the Sarissa obviously being the pike from the phalanx, the longer pike. What is behind the name in Sarissa Precision? Where did that come from?
I have no idea. I have no idea. It just ended up being a name, and then when you're trying to spell your email address out to somebody on the phone, you regret it a lot.
It's a great name. I love the fact that you're like, it just, it sounds cool. That's kind of why we picked it. That's awesome.
Probably the most unprecise thing you could have.
Yeah.
Well, I want to know how many war gamers, somebody comment if you just were like, oh, you're getting into Alexander Macedonian, kind of armies, and you've Googled that and you're like, what? Terrain, and you've got Wild West and World War II. That's awesome. The kind of follow-up question for that, and how did you get into the hobby? And again, I think you've hit the trend that everybody does. Is it's a passion for you. You're like, hey, I can do this, or I can do something. We need to make this or make it better, or regardless of who it's been that we've interviewed with miniatures or terrain or anything else, they're like, oh, I'm going to do this, and then they're like, oh, well, I'll just sell a few and it'll cover my costs. And then next thing you know, 15 years. You're talking to these two guys, Yanks from the States, idiots, and you've sold. I would hate to ask, but I know you guys have been very successful. I don't think I've gone to a club in the States that doesn't have some Sarissa Precision terrain on it, and just helps elevate kind of some tables. So I'm sure that's something that you can look back and kind of be like, okay, this came from Wild West saloons, and now it's all over the globe. One of the kind of follow-up questions to that are, what are some of the unanticipated lessons learned about getting into the business side of the hobby?
I think we took it very seriously at the start, so we did things properly. Yeah, so we didn't take shortcuts. So we kind of took it business-wise, took it quite seriously. You're taking people's money at the end of the day, so I think you've got a sort of, there's a little unwritten contract between you to give them something good for their money. So I think that's what we've always tried to do. We design things that are, don't cost a lot, have enough detail, we feel, to make them look good as standard, but they're not too expensive if someone wants to use it as a template for something else, or do a bit of kit bashing, or modifications on it as well. So that's where the sort of price points things, that's what we've always thought of for that.
I bet it's really exciting to see how people take your kits and add to them and modify them.
I think one, I won't say frustrating, but sometimes people go looking for something on the website, and we've categorized it, as you take Rome, it's Rome, but it could be anything in the Mediterranean or North Africa, or even going over to Southeast Asia, anywhere, because as some of the architecture gets copied, the styles get copied, there's plenty of places where so I think sometimes when you see someone that gets it and they start to mix things together, you just have to go down a street and you get those old towns, and the buildings are all different. They're all being built over a couple of hundred years, and as styles change and then styles are copied.
Yeah, it's a good observation.
No, perfect.
So it sounds like you mentioned also earlier that you get to play test a lot. I subscribe to several wargaming magazines, and it's always when there's a rules review, it's you often see Ural's terrain in the background with it. So I would assume you feel like you've got a very good pulse on the hobby community. A lot of times we hear people sharing concern that the hobby is graying, it's getting old. But what are your thoughts? Do you feel like the hobby is in a good position, good health? Is it growing? Is it graying out? What are your thoughts?
No, I think that we'll call it tabletop gaming and just be a little bit more general with it. But I think now it's where board gaming was 5 years ago, where console gaming was 10, 15 years ago. It's becoming a lot more just normally mainstream. So, I don't think that. I think that when you go to some events, there is a demographic, but there's a lot. If you go to Games Workshop, it's probably the best recruiting ground for the hobby there is, because a lot of these people will come into it and then they'll look around and they'll see something else and they will drift off and go somewhere. So, I think I don't see it going anywhere.
That's good.
No, that's a good answer. And if we need to get some Sarissa terrain into Henry Cavill's hands, right, to be like, it'll increase its popularity. So we talked about that. There is always these like transitions in the hobby, and like you said, as a business and taking it seriously from the onset, I think you have to be apprised of issues that are facing the hobby. But I totally concur and co-sign with what you said. I do think it's becoming more mainstream, like board games, and these skirmish games I think are adding to it, because it's maybe like a step up from a board game. So it's not hard for people to be like, I don't have to paint a rank and flank army. I don't have to paint hundreds of miniatures. I can paint 30 and play a good game, whether it's Mortal Gods, Footsore, like you'd said, some of those companies that do some of the stuff like that is amazing. With terrain can really add to those. But I know when we talk to miniature manufacturers, we talk about, what does it look like? The kind of reduction from metal. My old man is like, he hates plastics, like and plastics are great, right? All miniatures are great to some degree. But what do you like? How are terrain companies responding to any changes in the hobbies? And like just some thoughts in my head, or whether I don't see, when I had Wild West Towns in the 90s and like when I was first coming up in the hobby, it was a lot of like Old Glory, like resin. Terrain was like resin, and it was all self-made and those things. And now there's all these other avenues with MDF is like caught on like wildfire there in the early 2000s. And I think you were you guys spearheading it, because everything you came out with a bunch of periods, I felt like, pretty quickly, and it just was all over, and it was inexpensive and looked amazing. But with like 3D printing, all of this other stuff that's out there, like what do you think as far as terrain companies? How do you navigate that, and what's kind of the way ahead, you think?
I think each has got its merits and downsides, but also it's got its fans and its haters. Some people, just like you say, it's got to be metal. Some people, it's got to be plastic. Some people, it's got to be resin, and some people don't care. And I think that it's the same with terrain. It doesn't have to be painted. There's plenty of people that just stick things together and paint them, and there's still people that will use a shoebox.
Yeah.
So go old school and use a shoebox. So I think that what's happening is that it's probably expanding, and people are getting more choice. And is that ever a bad thing?
No. And I hear in your comments there, and I completely agree with it. As much shade as I like to throw at 40K and GW, as much as the next historical war gamer, you can't play. I totally agree with the adage that you can't play a war game wrong, and you just can't. If you're having fun and enjoying yourself, and if somebody else is, then you're doing it right. And whether that's with toothpicks or, with amazing Sarissa terrain, then you're doing it right. You're having fun. That's the goal. Kind of go ahead.
I'd like to build on that original question, though. So I don't know, you probably haven't, Matthew, seen it in the States, but being over here in UK, I know the whole EU UK tariffs and trade stuff has hurt a lot of the miniature companies because they don't have the reps within the EU. Have you all been affected by that? I know there's been a lot of rises in costs for just materials affecting a lot of terrain companies. Is that also something you guys have had to deal with?
I think, a few years ago, the energy thing would really hurt us because we're quite a high energy use company, and it went up about 500% in the space of a couple of months. But we've got a solid foundation, and we look into stuff. Europe is about 25% of our business, direct sales. And we didn't have any fall off because we looked into it, understood how it worked, and didn't panic over it. So we've put in place, people can buy off our website with the VAT paid, and it just gets delivered like it used to, and there's no charges, etc. So it's exactly the same price as it was before. And then, the rest of the world, you just have to understand what it means to send something to somebody, overseas, understand what the limits are for, personal imports for customers. And if you know that, then you can, make sure people, just educate people to, order below this amount or don't go over this amount. So, yeah, we managed to navigate it okay. But we did spend some time looking at how it was going to affect us and what that meant. They've just introduced packaging legislation in Europe, which I've seen lots of people just stop shipping into Europe now because of it. But the UK introduced the same legislation about 4 years ago, and it was actually legislation that was coming in before Brexit, and Europe delayed it. The UK brought it in anyway. So it's stuff that people should be doing. A lot of it. It's safety, safety standards and safety statements on products. If you're selling stuff to people, you should have done that.
Yeah. It definitely sounds like when it comes to issues, and you mentioned early on that when you started it, you took it as this is a business, we're going to do it right. But it definitely sounds like you guys really put effort into looking ahead and planning accordingly, which is good to hear because it means you guys will probably be with us for a long time to come.
Yeah, we've got lots of stuff still to do.
Excellent, and we're gonna talk about that. That's that kind of curtails and wraps up, I guess, the first part, getting to know you, Steve, and your kind of journey in it. And there is a common thread, I think, with every war gamer on how they got their passion and then kind of expanding there. And I'm just in awe of the people. And I have immense respect for anybody in the hobby that's been able to kind of go out and be like, hey, obviously I have a passion for this and I want to do it. And you can make it into, at least a survivable income, right? So more hats off to you on that. And hopefully, people continue that trend, because we need, like you said, we need great companies. We need great maybe a person who wants to build terrain or build a terrain company isn't listening, because that would be competition, but like somebody in the miniature that's like, I'm going to come up with a different set of miniatures, and Steve will do the terrain for it. But switching the conversation, since people have gotten to know you in the foxhole, to Sarissa. I think you answered our initial question with why MDF terrain. Your buddy had the laser printer. It made sense. You wanted to do other Wild West buildings, and that makes sense. With all of the terrain that's going to go on here, and I'll at least say this, I think you can tell imitation is the highest form of flattery. And the Roman army, right? They normally learn from somebody else, and they'll just adapt the style and be like, okay, here's how we're going to win, right? The gladius is a Spanish sword, and it's in the idea. And when I saw Sarissa, I really think they were probably one of the first, and Steve, you'll know for sure, I bet, one of the first MDF companies on the market, and especially to take it to like a global scale. It feels like that. And now I feel like you've got a bunch of copycats. Like there's a bunch of MDF is kind of out there, and people are trying to mimic you and things like that, and how well you guys are doing stuff. Why continue with MDF? What are some of the benefits and struggles for that? And, you know, is Sarissa always going to be known as the MDF company? Are there other things that you're looking at or thinking about in the future?
Yeah, so, we make MDF terrain. That's what we do. We also do things that are totally not wargaming. So we make stuff for other people, and there's nothing to do with wargaming or model railways or anything like that. So we are a design and manufacturing business that's got a little bit of a wider thing than that. But that's all just stuff we do. So it's not what Sarissa is. That's something else. The coloured stuff we've started doing this year, we've actually had the capacity and the ability to do full colour MDF, printed MDF for 5 years. We've done lots of tokens and templates and things, but we just didn't do buildings. And we've been asked this quite a few times, why not? And the reason was because it would be really easy to just take one of our kits and then colour it up. And there you go, it's coloured, and it's a coloured version of what we did. But that kind of competes with a product that people like. So we felt that the coloured buildings we were going to do would be something different. It would be an alternative product, and it might not even necessarily for the same person, although you will get people that cross over. So our coloured buildings have all been designed to be full colour from the start. So the components, the way they sit on the sheets, whether is there, so that we don't need to double-sided print everything, etc. So there's a lot of that going into that. But that was a lot of conversations and a lot of thought, and we just didn't rush into that.
Yeah, I've got.
So it's still percolating.
Yeah.
No, we've started it now. We've got a vision for it, and we'll release lots, but we won't stop releasing what we call them raw MDF kits. We've still got lots of releases planned for this year on those, and the coloured stuff is alongside these as another product, another range.
Yeah, I got my hands on some of the colored stuff, the trees specifically.
Yeah.
For the project I'm doing for the Air Force, and I was pretty impressed. I think the only thing that had ever been on the market similar to that was the old foreground stuff. But I don't know how they went about doing theirs, but because yours has a really nice finish on it. Because I felt like the foreground stuff, it would come off on your fingers a little bit, whatever they use. But the way you've done yours is a really nice method, however it is.
Yeah, theirs was effectively emulsion, so it's water-based paint. So if you get any resin or you sweat, you might get a little bit of re-wetting. This is there's nothing secret. It's UV printed, so it's 4-color UV printed white. So it's a really strong instant cure process, so you don't get any re-wetting or anything like that. It's scuff resistant. It takes something to scratch it, scuff it. So it's and you get really bright, clean colours, and obviously you can print textures, you can print effects, things onto it. So we're really, quite excited about what we'll be able to do with that.
So when you're designing these trains, so you said the color stuff is all, you've designed it from the ground up. When you're designing new lines, do you all think specific battles? Do you think just kind of generic or specific periods? What's that process look like for you all?
I'll mention this point, Gary, who's the mad guy that does all the design work. He sits in his small room. If anyone wants to go and look at some of his ramblings and stuff, he's on Facebook as March Attack. We talk a lot, so we talk about stuff, and sometimes it'll be a kit will come along because we've got an idea, but we're not sure how to do it. So we'll make a kit just to try a technique out and see if something works, and it could be quite a small one. So if we do an old style water pump fire engine, little one, in one of the ranges. Yeah, that was to see if we could do a sort of American style locomotive. So that's why it was discs of MDF making up shapes and rings and stuff. So we did something small that used the same technique, tried it out, and then did something bigger. And we've used it, the Horsa glider with the wrap, making a skeleton and then wrapping card around it. It's like, why, like, you won't be able to make a glider out of MDF. Well, I think we can.
Yeah. I have to say too, that is awesome. I had no idea that basically when you prototype something, you're making a smaller design to like build it onto, hey, will this work, for a bigger kit? One of the things that I'm going to come to a defense of Sarissa right now. One of the things that I've heard with the Horsa glider, or I think it's like the water barrel kit and the water tower that I have for the Wild West, is everybody's like, oh man, this paper, is fiddly. If you just follow the instructions and take your time. I have seen so many people, like I game bolt action a lot, and I have a lot of people that do the glider kits, and they're like, oh, I just hate putting this together. Where can you buy a Horsa glider at 1/56 scale for like $10, $15, somewhere in there? I think they're a little bit increased since I've bought these, and be able to put it. And as long as you take your time and follow the directions, very discreet with glue and everything, like you can't. The models that you're going to buy are going to be well over $100, and the thing I have sitting in my hands, with paint and everything, is maybe $20, and it looks amazing. So that's my defense of the people that are crappy with the paper and they can't.
The grey board's quite a funny one, the card, because it is. We do sometimes, people say, oh, why have you used that? And it's not because it's cheaper. It's because it lets you do things that you can't do with MDF. It's and once it's painted and glued, it's as hard as MDF. If you've got small card components, if you just run some of the watery super glue across them, they go like concrete, or just some PVA, let it soak in, water down some PVA. But once it's painted, you'd never know it was card.
I've had people pick it up on the table, and a little boy at an earlier tournament actually threw it on the table, and it's still alive. So I'm like, he didn't throw it very far. He threw it on the table, but I'm a huge fan of it, and it just it's amazing stuff. I think that leads us into another question. A follow up, or maybe to make sure that we've answered that. When you're coming out with, I want to even expand on Rob's question before you move to the next one. When you're coming out with new, I know you guys did even a Gates of Antares terrain scale, and I know you've done a lot of the Samurai Tests of Honor. You've done Gangs of Rome, which I think I'm super impressed. Again, the Roman stuff is near and dear to my heart, but you guys have made that look immaculate. Do you, how do you go about selecting those? Do you go with periods? Again, we know that you're a company. You've said this from the onset. Like, I take it seriously. I'm giving you a product, and I'm taking money for it. I want to be, so I assume there's financial decisions in there about, hey, is this game going to sell? Is this game going to be popular? I.e., is this game going to sell a lot of terrain with it? What are some of the thoughts for that, and what are some of the maybe successes that you've seen there, or lessons learned from picking? Because Wyndhurst, I think, question was specific battle engagement or period. What are some of the thoughts, or maybe explain to us how some of those came to fruition?
So there's some kits happen just because it sounds like a really cool idea and we want to do it. Yeah. And I'd also say with that is some things that you think are a really good idea, other people might not think so. So it's really easy to get excited about something that no one else will get excited about. So I think that we have popular ranges, and then within that we've got we'll have standard kits, and then we'll have some feature kits and things. I think it's just breaking down. If you do something new, it's breaking it down and having, the couple of feature kits, the standard kits, and looking at it in little chunks like that. And if you do that, then as long, if you've not designed something that's terrible, then people will want it because they might have had some other kits of yours, or it could just be that it suits a new game. We don't tend to go game chasing. It's something we don't do. If we do it, it's usually because someone's spoken to us and said, could you do this for us? We've got this coming. We'd really like this. And we'll work with them to do that. But we don't tend to go game chasing because you'll lose your focus, and then who are you making it for and what are you making it for?
Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The a follow-up question to this, and then we'll go on to the next one. My last follow-up. What is, just because we have you here with all of your immense knowledge, what is the most popular Sarissa kit?
25mm round base. No,
that's fair.
Fair enough.
The single kit. The Hors, funnily enough, the Horsa, that about 2 months ago, we sold one that means we've made more Horsas than they did during World War II. So, I can't remember. It's like 3,500 of them or something. So
that's funny.
but I wouldn't see some stuff that's really popular is really strange. We sell lots of ships, yeah, and it doesn't seem the obvious thing, but I think that's more it's because it's a model to make. You said it earlier. Sometimes figures, you buy a figure not because you'll ever play the game, but because it's a really cool figure and you quite fancy painting it. So I think there's some stuff in amongst it like that that always sells, but I'm not sure what people ever do with them.
I've seen. I think it's you guys that make some of the Japanese Navy or some of like the cog ships and the I can't remember the name of that rule sets, the bill hooks. Never mind the bill hooks, but then they came out with the naval one.
Yeah, the boat hooks. Yeah.
Yeah. So you just probably sold a bunch of cogs like as soon as that thing dropped.
We did in COVID when everyone was shut at home. We started, for our own sanity, we started doing a little weekly video live stream, and it was more just for half an hour for us to talk. And the cog was something that came off a conversation because somebody that was watching it asked about ships and said about, I'd love to get a sort of cog type thing. And then Gary the next day designed one, and the day after that we cut it and painted it. So this was the Thursday, so by the Monday we had a kit that was ready to go. And
That's awesome.
We showed it off a week later. Here you go.
That's awesome. The that can lead us, I think, into the next question: the cost versus rival companies. And I think you've touched on a lot of this topic when you talked about the raw kits are so inexpensive, the quality is there, and I know for even the raw kits, you sell add-ons like roof tiles and some other things like that to kind of make the kit even more than what it wants. And so it seems that you're at least from your earlier kind of discussion points, you're at least saying, we want to keep it tends to fall. I keep using that economic principle. Like there's no such thing as a free lunch. Like people, have a certain amount of discretionary income. Us war gamers never try to pay attention to that. We just impulse buy all the time. But you have that raw kit and you're transitioning into the coloreds for MDF and the actual painted stuff that's going to come on there. What is I'd say the guiding thing in all of that? Obviously there's a need for, people have probably requested, hey, do you guys make this pre-painted or do you guys see this? Do you still see yourself, having to make sure that it's inexpensive or that it's, popular? What are some kind of guiding things still as going forward with when you're out there in the terrain landscape of miniature wargaming?
I think the cost of the kits, there's lots of things that go into it, but effectively, it's the time to make the kit and the materials, and that's how much a kit costs. What happens is people can look at it and say, "Oh, why don't you have interiors?" And my answer to that is, not everyone wants an interior, but if we add one, everyone will have to pay for it. So we don't put it in. We take the roof stack, roofs come off, floor stack, things like that. But it doesn't have an interior, because if you want one, you can go and get some doll's house furniture or something, or just scratch build one. But if we put it in, you'll have to pay for it, and you might not need it or want it. I see lots of comments of people about interior. It's a funny one, because when you actually see most people gaming, and I do this, if I put one, unless I'm playing a game where you need to go inside it, if a unit goes into a building, you just push them up against it and tell everyone they're inside there now, and you don't even take the roof off, because taking the roof off, putting them in, then putting it back on so the table's neat and tidy takes some time, and it's just faff for me. And if you leave the roof off and the top floor off, then you've got clutter all over the table, and it doesn't look good. So I think that that's what that's the process we have for it, is if it's not actually necessary, then why do it? And if we're not making dolls' houses, they're buildings to go on a table to roll dice around.
Yeah, and that puts it back into the hobby, the hobbyist's hands, is like, if they want to do it. And the way your raw kits work, it's pretty inexpensive to do. And I think a lot of people, with the pictures, have gotten pretty creative. The only follow-up that I have to that, and then Wyndhurst, I'm going to kick it to you for question 6, is I know that there's been some other like forays that you guys have done, and I think one of the things that got pushed maybe a year ago, that I've seen, I think do pretty well, was the terrain tiles. How do you think terrain tiles have fared? What are your thoughts behind them? And then, what are the future of, what was the components coming up with terrain tiles, and what's kind of the future of that? And again, for the listener, terrain tile basically being where you can plug and play with these tiles to make almost a gaming board, and you can make the terrain kind of, I think, seamlessly go into the bases, and then you can mix and match, almost like hexes, how octagons or the hexes used to be, where you used to be able to make tables out of these whole things. So what are your thoughts on that, Steve?
It started off, we did some, and it was just a way of linking some stuff up. But the idea with them was you could make a little bit more of a diorama around something, perhaps, and then sit it on a mat, and it would lose that square edge. You could build and have a little bit more around it, but you could build little complexes and farms and things, and it would just hold them together and frame it all. If you did the bases, flowed across the bases and the joins, and then it worked really well, and we just decided that it might be something that people would want to build bigger displays, etc. of. So that was that. They're very popular, and I've seen people do things with them that I never even thought of. Yeah. Which is always good when people take something and do something different with it. So yeah, it's we've played around with ideas at how we could create levels out of them. So that's the sort of next thing. So if you could just use some foam board or something, but get them to join at different heights. So to keep that consistency, they join as you step up. So we've got some ideas for that, and that'd be quite cool.
Awesome. That's awesome.
You mentioned,
back over to you, Wyndhurst.
Yeah, you mentioned that you to keep an eye on the future of technology and what's changing. Will it always be MDF for Sarissa, or do you think you'll incorporate some of the newer technologies, 3D printing and stuff, into your inventory?
We've talked about doing, it's like little accessory packs, isn't it? We could do chimneys and window boxes and things, just dressing up, set dressing for it. So, there is stuff like that we could do. the thing is that there's plenty of other people out there doing some stuff like that. So,
True.
you know, I've got no problem if someone saw it'd be really cool if you had some chimneys and just point someone at some chimneys and say, look, get them from this guy because he's got loads. I don't think you need to own everything. Yeah. I think, you know, if you do what you do well, and then, you know, and you can work. I like working with people rather than against them. You know, it's much easier when you're both trying to do the same thing. So, you know, we've done lots of little projects with people and help people. You know, we do some contract. You know, we get people contact us. Can you cut this file for me? And we just cut things for people as well. So, you know, we can help them out, sort files. So we're nice guys.
So
I would agree with that.
So building on that, so what's 2025 hold for Sarissa? Anything you can share with us that might not have gone out live yet, or just kind of general direction of things, or what's on the horizon?
We'll definitely have a lot more coloured stuff this year, but that doesn't mean that we won't have the raw kits as well. So it's a bit of both. So there's quite a lot to come. You know, and we're gonna spend some time this year on. So we did lots of guides and videos and things, you know, a couple of years ago. So we're going to go back through that because we're always playing about with techniques, hobby techniques for building kits, assembling them, painting them. You know, there's materials come along. So we started using acrylic brush pens a few years ago. And now it's become a real big thing in the hobby. I see lots of people talking about them. Yeah,
I've got some to try.
You know, but sometimes with stuff like that, it's not, you know, pointing people where they can get them, because a lot of these things you buy them and they can be quite expensive. Yeah, but actually when you go looking around, a lot of these things have been around for years. You know, acrylic paints, you can get them in art stores and you can get big tubes of them. And when it's for slapping onto a big building or something, you don't want to be buying Games Workshop, you know, 30mm pots. Yeah. And going through 5 or 6 of them. So
what would be to see if we can get anything additional out of you? What would be, maybe you can hint at some of the new things that are coming for a different period, a game, whether it's historical or fantasy period that I know you guys are always busy with designing new things. I do feel like you release kits all the time, especially the raw kits. What's something that, you know, the listener, audience member, especially if they like the period or anything, that they should be happy to see, and maybe one or, you know, a few variations that you'll go on to here in 2025?
So what's imminent? We've got some Burrows and Badgers kits, some new ones that are coming. I've just Michael at Oath Swans just written some really cool little paragraphs about them. Give them a little backstory, which he's great at. So they're imminent. They'll be in the next couple of weeks. We've done our trench system that we've got some stuff coming up for that, just some add-on bits that will work with the existing stuff and expand that. And then Tolling Chester's got some new bits for sort of middle of the year, give it a slightly different look. That's a full colour range, the sort of high fantasy range. And then we're looking at talking through at the moment, just sorting out the details of it. But I think some full colour sci-fi will be on the cards for the second half of the year. So there you go. There's a few things.
Awesome. I'll turn it back over to Rob to Wyndhurst for any follow-ups. I want this to be known though. You know, especially we do have a lot of listeners here in the States, and again, both you gents are over in England, which is the mecca of wargaming, right? But for those in the States that don't know, or, you know, at these local clubs that we've kind of patched into and everything, I just want to give you guys your flowers at Sarissa. 7 years in a row, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, you guys have won Best Wargame Accessory from Wargames Illustrated. 2018 and 24, you just captured it again. So, the fact that Steve is down here in the gutters with me and Wyndhurst, don't hold that against him. They are the premier, in my mind, terrain manufacturer out there, and they've been copied a lot. It feels like everybody and their brother now is trying to get an MDF maker, just because Steve and his company have made it look that easy, which it's not. I know, in the designing and everything else, and to pass on the savings to the customer, he's just done a wonderful job for you to be able to get. You put a terrain mat down, and especially when I was starting out, I showed Steve all of my from 15 millimeter Western Town, everything back there. I will say hundreds of your kits, even though some of them are the 10 millimeter and 15 millimeter, so they shouldn't, those aren't giant. But as far as the 28 millimeter, when I was getting into it and building tables, it's so cheap, ineffective, easy, and it can just look wonderful. Those factories, the ruined factories, are just amazing, and everything that they really do is amazing. So I would just, again, chide or be a Sherpa for the listener, the audience member. Do go check them out. They are an amazing, inexpensive terrain manufacturer. And really, Steve, we appreciate you. I'll turn it over to Wyndhurst for any kind of follow-ups, and then we'll go into our next section, pending Wyndhurst.
Yeah, so Steve, I mean, again, I really appreciate you being here. Kind of what Kentuckians mentioned, kind of copycats. I really think you've inspired, Sarissa's inspired the hobby community, for individuals to get laser cutters and do their own stuff, for other companies just to kind of fill the void. And, like you said, you don't want to own everything. So I see a lot of other companies filling the gaps, which I think is it's great for the community. The more we have out there, the better. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to ask or add on that, Kentuckian hasn't said. But we would like to include you in our next two segments, our final two. So our kit bag and our scouting report. So you and I talked briefly. Kentuckian had a suggestion, and I think you mentioned it as well, Steve, that do it. But for our kit bag, which, as most of our regular listeners know, for those who don't, it's just something, a tip or trick or tool that you can take from us and put in your kit bag. And so for this month, we want to talk about files, specifically files for find the edges of maybe terrain or models, whatever. I use I'm cheap and lazy, so I get like big packs of these nail files. They don't last very long. You're going to burn through it pretty quick, but you can get hundreds of them for a couple dollars. Steve, you use something similar? You use something different? What do you use? Anything like that?
No, exactly the same. Cheap, a big bag of cheap ones, and they do the trick. Yeah. So no, exactly the same. You could just get sheets of sandpaper as well, and make little sanding blocks with a bit of the sprue, MDF sprue, just to give you an edge to work with. But no, that's perfect.
There's I use the wood files. Like, I'll get a kit of the metal ones. They're out of my reach right now, but if the three of us know, we've been in the hobby for a minute, and the metal miniatures, when they came out, right, and they would have flashing, or the bases would be, every one of us I know has done an army where we just file the bottom, and by an hour later you've got lead all over your hand, and you're just like, oh man. But files, I know this too, and being in the hobby, you can speed through anything in the hobby, right? And you can't do it wrong. But there are times when, if you take that extra time, whether it be the piece of terrain you're working on, and you file it down just where it's right, maybe to fit together a little bit better, or to get the edges right. And the same thing with the miniature, whether it be mold lines or whatever it is, it's really worth it, and it can make it pop in the end. And so files are a huge thing that some of the buddies I talk to that are still, I would say, newer in the hobby, just try to give these tips and tricks. So hopefully that's the point of this, is files are good. I think you should use them with terrain and with miniatures in dressing them up and cleaning them up. You don't have to use them a lot with Sarissa, because those things are perfect from the beginning, right, Steve? Right?
Yeah.
but for the other companies, and I'm glad. I know that one of the comments, hopefully I came to the defense there of my only kind of backtrack is the Horsa glider for all of you, ninny muggins online that are like, oh, this paper, or the shutters, like, just be patient, do your time. This kit is so inexpensive, and for you to complain about that, shame on you. And keep buying the Horsa glider and everything else that Sarissa does. The last segment that we'll move to after we've talked files, in our kit bag, is our scouting report. So we've got our binoculars out and we're looking ahead and what's the future. I guess I'll kick this off. I have a tournament which is going to be loaded with Sarissa tables here in Clarksville, Tennessee. We got 20 people signed up, so I'm going to be hosting a Bolt Action version 3 tournament, a little combat patrol in the next week. I still am getting after my ancients and all of those things. I bought the Sarissa column, the Arc de Triomphe for the Romans, and I'm my Romans. I have my Caesarians over here, and they're almost painted. But my goal is, once I kick the crap out of a Gallic army, I'm going to make a video where they're marching through it. I'll drag a piece of paper or something and have Caesar marching through the column back to Italy. But I've got a lot of my ancient armies that people are seeing on the shelf. My gunfighters, my Sarissa Wild West buildings are back there in the back, so I really look to get paint onto those. And that might bring up a good question. Steve, I know MDF soaking up paint, I have heard of the stories, and I'm here with the expert right now. I've heard stories of people spraying like matte varnish or clear coat and then painting them. I spray paint all of my Sarissa MDF, and I know it soaks up the paint and makes it more sturdier in my mind. Do you have a favorite way that you do it when you're painting? Do you clear coat and then paint? Do you just prime it really heavy and then paint? What's that?
No, we don't prime anything. We just paint it.
Oh, nice.
So in my previous life, I spent nearly 30 years working in print. Yeah. So it's impossible for MDF to soak up paint because paint's made of pigment and carrier, and pigment's solid. So it's made to sit on the surface. So if you put, and the carrier's supposed to either soak in or evaporate away, if you put paint on something and it disappears, it's because there isn't enough pigment going on to what you're painting. So there's a couple of things around that, and it's nothing to do with the cost of the paint, because some really expensive paints don't have pigment in them. It's just a pigment thing. So we use, if you go on brush painting stuff, we'll use artist acrylic, emulsion tester pots, like home tester pots and things, and things like that, because they've got they flow nicely, but don't water them down. If you're using water-based paints, put them on neat and spread them, and they will go over, and the detail will come back. The etching and things. Yeah. It'll come back. It might look like it's when it's wet and shiny, but once it's dried, it'll be fine. Spray cans, feel how heavy they feel. We use a brand called Montana Gold. They're a graffiti paint, and they're low pressure, so they don't blow minis all over the table or bits all over the place, but they're high pigment. So when you pick the can up, it feels heavier than another type of can. So sometimes when you're picking up cans, some car body sprays and things, when you pick them up, the cans feel really heavy. It's because there's a lot of pigment in them.
Awesome.
So that's but
no,
that's
a better kit bag than files.
Yeah, that's perfect, because now the biggest things I have are the ancient projects, and then the terrain. I need to get painting on some of this amazing Wild West Sarissa terrain, and that's going to help me speed through painting it. So hopefully you even help my scouting report.
Just getting looking around down. Seeing if I've got a can lying somewhere, but there's nothing up here. No.
Well, I'll kick it over to one of you two for your guys' scouting report on what's on the future.
I want to kick it over to Steve, but Steve, this is not for Sarissa, this is for you. We want to know what is in the hobby future for you.
I want to get an army on the table this year for something and play some miniature games with something new. So I've been sort of giving it some thought. I'm going to do a sort of Scottish Isles list, Dark Age Isles list, little retinue, and play some games with that. So
do you have a rule set in mind?
That's my. Sorry.
Do you have a rule set in mind?
Yeah, I'm gonna use the Barnes War Conquest rules. We're gonna do it with. So yeah, we've played quite a lot of that, and it suits. And so yeah, that's the plan.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thanks.
It will happen.
We'll be waiting on. We'll be looking for photos of it when it happens.
Yeah. We'll keep you honest. I'm gonna shoot Sarissa an email like 3 months from now, like, hey, where's Steve at with his army? Put some progress photos up. But no, go over to you, Wyndhurst.
Yeah. So I also have some Sarissa buildings. I got for the project I'm doing for the Air Force. I got some row houses to actually represent like base housing, and man, I got the back garden walls, which are in that card. And the first set I did was a nightmare because I didn't take my time. Like Kentuckian keeps saying, go slowly and read the instructions. And then I was like, man, that was a nightmare. And the second set I put together went so much smoother because I was like, all right, I got to slow down. But I got those to paint. A lot of my time's been focused on this project, kind of bringing wargaming back into the military on a kind of miniature scale level as opposed to the higher level stuff, and it's really taken off and looks like it's going to be a thing. I've actually been approached and done a lot of talks with RAF because they want in on it too, which is awesome. It's interesting for me seeing how wargaming really started with the military and then went into a hobby and totally like lost its roots, but kind of bring it back around and as a good teaching tool, learning tool.
It's awesome.
But yeah, that's going to be the most for my time, hobby-wise, is working on this project.
The last, I'm drooling over the kits that you make, Steve. So my last pitch for you is just go online and look at these kits. They are amazing. Like you said, the Sarissa kit, when it came with it, you pick it out of it and you cut it out, and you cut the walls out and everything, and then you put the kit together. And with the scraps from his kit, I can put debris and make it really come to life. And so this is just the terrain, the factory. I can't say enough about your company, Steve. It's not even impressive in my mind that you won it 7 times in a row, because you guys deserve it. You're out there just crushing the hobby game. You're making it cheap and inexpensive for people to get into it. I remember, again, when I was a poor law student, I bought a lot of your company's terrain to get tables to expand the hobby. So I really can't say enough great things about you guys, and what you're doing it right. I really appreciate you making it so inexpensive for people to get in and get this hobby and get across the table from each other and enjoy the shenanigans as well as the banter and everything. So it can't be said, just how amazing Sarissa is. I look forward to everything you guys are going to do in the future as well. So Wyndhurst, any other alibis or anything else?
Nope. Steve, do you have any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, it's been great. A pleasure being on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Happy to have you. And again, for those listeners that are joining us, please go to Sarissa, check them out. I guarantee you that you can find terrain for whatever you want to war game on there. Just like Steve said, navigate that site. I found stuff in, the feudal Japan type of stuff that I've used in European or the Middle East. It is the only thing prohibiting you is, in my mind, your own imagination. And like Steve said, you can check out. There has been some amazing stuff done with his kits online. So give them a look, give them a shout, and tell them that On Patrol sent you. So without further ado, Steve, again, hats off to you. We appreciate you being here with us. And until the next time, grab your spear, your shield, your musket, or your belt-fed machine gun, and we'll see you on the next episode of On Patrol. Over and out.
Bye, guys.